glad that you're here tonight. This is the third installment of our speaker series called Prairie Conversation with Wes Jackson and Friends. And I wanted to start tonight by thanking the partners that made it possible with us. One of them is the Resilience Studies Consortium, that is a group of about 10 universities that is helping fund this night. So if you could clap for them with me. And our other partner is the Land Institute that is also sponsoring the night. We're going to hear from two speakers and less tonight. And I'm going to start by introducing Dr. Prairie Yeager. This is Dr. Prairie Yeager. She is a transdisciplinary scientist who has been working in the Andes of South America for over 2 decades. Her research is aimed at understanding the social and ecological impacts of climate change in high mountain environments, that lies from the mountains to the plains, identifying pathways to strengthen the resilience of natural alpine ecosystems and supporting local traditional mountain communities. I'm so glad that Dr. Prairie is here. She was introduced to us by Kurt Holt, which is one of our trustees. And you grew up in Salina, right?
No, my grandmother's from Salina.
Your grandmother's from Salina.
That's right.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be here today and share this time with all of you. And I am going to keep an eye on the time, starting now. And I'm going to talk about the Andes and the mountains. So we'll get a good look at that, and then we'll go on to the plains with Jason. I want to dedicate this talk to my grandmother, like was just mentioned. She's from Salina, and she painted this nice, beautiful flower. Virginia Ricard is her name. And I'll just tell you a little bit about my background. I grew up in Colorado, so we're neighbors. I grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado. I went to Colorado State University. I studied anthropology as an undergraduate. Then I went on and did my master's in archaeology. I studied Inca archaeology because I was interested in thinking about empires that grew up in the mountains. And they had different frames of working with the environment, different frames of sustainability. And I wanted to learn more about that. Then I went on to Yale to do my PhD in cultural ecology, so that's how humans are influencing their environment. And after that, after I finished my doctoral program, I did my postdoc at NASA at Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. And I got hired on at NASA, and I worked there for 10 years. And then I started at Stony Brook University, which is in New York. And that's where I'm at now. I'm in the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences. And this is pretty much what I study. I study the people that live up high in the mountains. They're indigenous peoples. There's the Quechua, Aymara, and Atacameños that live in the southern Andes. I study their animals, the llamas and alpacas being among the most favorite. And the traditional ones that were domesticated there originally about 6,000 years ago. And I study the pastures. So there are pasture grasses and peatland systems. So here's an example of a peatland system. I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. But that's the primary pasture. That photograph up there on the top is a peatland pasture, which is critical to llamas and alpacas. Without those, it would not be a sustainable endeavor. It would be impossible. You would have to bring in the storage. But down on the bottom, you see that there's some localization processes happening. Water is being taken out of mountains for downstream purposes. Some of it's for mining, some of it's for irrigation, some of it's for hydropower. So there's a conflict. Now, I look at landscapes as these physical manifestations of these interactions between humans and their environment. So we're shaped by the environment, but we also shape the environment. So that's just a little bit of the theoretical framework. And I look at all the spheres of the ecosystems and the high mountain Andes. So we're talking about the hydrosphere, the biosphere, the atmosphere. And we're thinking about this globally, of course, because we're facing global climate change right now, right? And I'm going to talk about some of the critical key markers of that, because that affects everyone. And we're in this global society together, and all of this information is ready at your fingertips from NASA collecting the data and by their satellites, which I got to work on for a while, and looking at vegetation changes with Landsat data, satellite data. So the general observational question, of course, is the Earth warming, and the evidence, that they gather speaks to yes, indeed it is, and we have this from measurements of the glaciers and the ice sheets, from thermometers on land, from ocean temperatures via depth probes, satellite atmospheric temperatures, etc. And we know that recent warming is faster and faster. We have an acceleration of warming that's occurring, okay? And this warming that's occurring is also not equal globally, okay? Up in the high mountains, it's warming up faster, and up in the Arctic regions, at the poles, it's also warming up faster. There's what's called a polar amplification there. I can talk more about that later, but here are just our signature responses by the Earth system to warming temperatures. We've got ice sheet loss, Greenland and Antarctica. We've got glacial loss across the mountain range. We're not only talking about the Andes, we're talking about the Himalayas and the Rockies, right? We're talking about Arctic sea ice extent. That's diminishing rapidly. September is when we usually take these measurements and find that it's shrinking at a rate of 12% per decade, and the ocean temperature is going up, right? And especially in the top 700 meters of the oceans. And we have sea level rise along with that. Part of that's from glacial melt and ice sheet loss. Part of that's from thermal expansion, right? As heat warms up and expands. This is one of my favorite graphs, okay? We're looking at carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. What's the main driver of warming? We have fossil fuel emissions that are trapping heat. It's the greenhouse effect. And if you look at 800,000 years from the ice core data from Antarctica, that's our oldest record that we have of carbon dioxide trapped in little air bubbles. You can see that it's off the charts. It's called a hockey stick, right? It's off the chart. It's the highest it's ever been over the past 800,000 years. And we know that humans, Homo sapiens at least, have been here about 200,000 years, 250,000 years, right? In there. So we've never been this high before. And temperature will continue to rise with that, even if we stop emissions, because CO2 traps heat and it stays in the atmosphere, sometimes for a couple hundred years. Now, climate change impacts, well, no. We have changes in seasonality. We have extreme events. We have heat waves. We have longer wildfire seasons. We have frost-free seasons. And droughts along with that. So the evidence is clear. The Earth is warming. The IPCC, the National Panel on Climate Change, advises us to take note and to address this as soon as we can. So we're no longer in just the ecosphere of the globe, but we're also people. We're in what I'm going to call the anthroposphere, right? The Anthropocene. So we need to think about how humans are interacting with all of these spheres of change, ecological sphere of change. Now I'll take you to the Andes, okay? Peru, Bolivia, and Chile, up high. I'm talking about my base camp being 4,200 meters. If someone wanted to help me with the conversion there, we're talking about, above 13,000, thank you. And up there, those glaciers are called Andean, they're considered Andean water towers because the glaciers are providing water, drinking water, for downstream populations, and this is 80% of the fresh water supply. Hydropower, everything that they need is coming from these high mountain regions. And that's the same generally in Colorado as well, right? And this is just a framework for thinking about these changes. We also have to think about changes in precipitation patterns and how that will change. And then it's linked to peatland systems, which I'm just about to get into. So the ND glaciers, I can talk more about that. I'm going to keep moving fast because I know we want to get through this. But we've looked at them through the satellite imagery, and we can say, yes, these are receding about 30% loss over a 20-year period. So we can project that into the future, and we can say, well, a lot of the smaller low-lying glaciers are going to be gone by mid-century, by 2100. We don't know, right? We don't know the emission trajectories yet, so we don't know the warming scenarios. But we can say it's not looking good, and the melting is accelerating. There's a lot of outcomes of this glacier loss. It impacts not only the tourism, people come to the Andes to climb high mountains, but it impacts the local communities that depend on that water. Those glaciers are also considered what are called apus, or deities. And so there's a cosmological significance of seeing them disappear as well. There's more hazards. There's lots of traditional mountain livelihoods, people that live up there in the mountains. They no longer have water. What are they to do? And there's lots of climate data records. As the glaciers are records, as they melt, that record gets depleted, right? So what we do is we set up vegetation monitoring sites at high altitudes. So we pick a mountaintop, we go out there, we count all of the species that are growing. We do species diversity and cover, and then we go back 5 years and we do it again. Because we want to understand how the alpine plants are changing. And this is part of a larger network. We set up the first Gloria sites in Peru in 2002. We have sites in Bolivia as well and in Chile. This is the highest site in the world, which is at 5,498 meters. You can see the site is right next to the glacier. We're working right up behind it. So as the glaciers retreat, the vegetation is advancing, but only if it can, right? The temperature's changing as well, and that impacts alpine plants. Because alpine plants are unique. They have, I didn't put one, there's a picture of a couple of them there, but they have long, thick root systems. And they are slow growing, and they're close to the ground. But with changing temperatures, they're not growing fast enough, and grasses are coming in and displacing some of those alpine plants. Some of those are important for biodiversity in general, but also for medicinal purposes. Excuse me, I went the wrong way. So let me talk to you now about peatland systems. Now these are the pasture grasses that I'm interested in. Now, peatlands are an interesting vegetation community because what happens is they grow so fast that they become waterlogged, that they're trapping the CO2 that they're uptaking from the atmosphere and burying it in the ground, and new vegetation is growing over that. That's what defines a peatland system, right? It's organic matter that gets trapped over thousands of years. Now these peatland systems have started growing in the early Holocene, so they're thousands of years old, right? But what's happening is that they're drying out, and as they dry out, they release that stored carbon and methane into the atmosphere. Peatlands exist around the globe, not just in the tropical Andes, but up in the northern hemisphere as well. That's where a majority of them are located. They only cover about 3% of the total land surface area, but they store about 30% of the soil carbon. So that's huge. They have a lot of ecosystem services. We got flamingos coming into these peatland systems, the llamas and alpacas. That's the primary forage. It's nutritious, it's palatable, it's exactly what they need. So I look at these systems and I say, well, what can we do about it? And we have to recognize that the people
are there to take care of the peatland systems, actually. They have been irrigating these systems and expanding them also for hundreds of years, over generations of time. And how do they do that? By regulating the water flow that's coming off of the glaciers, redirecting it, and supplementing the growth of these peatland systems, keeping them healthy, making sure that they have water. That's critical. But you can see in some of these pictures what happens in the desiccation is they completely dry out. You can see in the lower, maybe on the lower left there, there's a dead peatland. So these systems are disappearing in a matter of 5 to 10 years now, just in recent decades. This is another example of a healthy peatland and a dry, degraded, abandoned system. So we do a lot of different tools to map them, their extent using satellite imagery. We find that they're much larger area than the glacial area. So thinking about what happens to water resources in the future, these peatland systems are actually capturing water, storing it, and regulating it. So they let it out during the dry season when there's no precipitation. So they're just these wetland storage systems that are so critical that we need to protect. And I work with the local communities to look at how's the peatland in your community. What's the level of degradation? What's the amount of intervention that we can do? Like I said, I work with the indigenous communities, so Peru, the Quechua and the Aymara and the Atacameños. They have a lot of different management practices. A lot of them have to do with cleaning canals, obviously, and redirecting water, but there's a lot of conflict too. Sometimes people will cut off some water supplies because of their concern for the bofedales or the peatland systems. So this is some of the research that we're looking at. Sometimes there's high erosion events that cut off the water supply as well. The groundwater is also dropping. The water table's dropping. So that's another concern. I've done household surveys with the communities, thinking about their practices and thinking about the drivers of change. They recognize, of course, and just like all of you recognize climate change in your own backyard. Well, how do they describe it? They describe it as a decrease in precipitation, hardened soils, greater evaporation due to heat increase, drying of springs, rapid deglaciation. They need more canals. The water is scarce. There's a lack of resources to help them, continually manage these resources. So that's pretty much the bottom line. And what's happening is a lot of them are migrating out of the mountain areas into the cities to find work. We've done some modeling to look at, what's the precipitation going to be like in the future? We find that there's going to be an increase in basically extreme events, right? And the total precipitation that comes during the extent of the wet season will be dramatically reduced to 1 or 2 days, 3 days. It'll come down in downpour events instead of, across the spectrum of the entire season. This is one of the last herders in Chile that I worked with, and you can see that pipeline piping that water out, and it's completely desiccated now in that region. There's little bofedales. So the hydrological support is complex. There's decreasing water resources. The resiliency of these systems is also decreasing because of the water shortages. We want to try and ascertain what the differential response will be across different regions and help local communities adapt, obviously, because that's critical, to displacement and for environmental justice purposes as well. So we need increased data accessibility. A lot of them don't get the information from the government, like about the glaciers retreat. They don't really have the numbers in hand. They know it's happening, but how are they going to make informed water management decisions and empowerment for water management decisions without that data. So we try and get that straight to them. Technological inputs, increased productivity with irrigation, more collaborative community work on those irrigation projects, and diversification of local economic activities. So not only selling the llama, alpaca, wool, but the leather and the meat as well. And that's all I wanted to share with you guys today.
Wow.
So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Yeager. We will hold the questions and answers for the end. Now I want to call Jason Graves and introduce Ken. I met Jason in 2020 when I moved to Salina, and he says a sentence that I always repeat when we started nerding together about gardening. He said that if you can grow something in Kansas, you can grow it anywhere.
There you go.
With Jason's help, of course.
Oh, yes, we like to help people be successful. So, yes, yes.
He's our local extension agent, and he is a great partner. It is great to know that we can call Jason if we have any questions about gardening or about the environment. And we wanted to start with Dr. Yeager that zoomed out and gave us some planetary and some mountainous data. And then now we're zooming all the way into our community right here. And Jason's going to give his perspective on how he sees things changing.
Okay, excellent. Well, yes, thank you for the great presentation, the lead in. So now we can, like Sabrina said, hopefully we can zoom in a little bit. We can see some things as I help our local gardeners. My role with Extension is very local, and I actually am a local boy myself. I grew up I was telling Wes out here in Lincoln County, so not too far away. I grew up on a farm, so I've been in Kansas as a native my whole life here, and being a part of the extension system has offered this interesting opportunity to be on the ground with a lot of our local residents right here that really value this. I think a lot of us in the room, maybe speaking to the choir here, but a lot of the information we take for granted, sometimes they are just learning. And so in order to help them along their journey of understanding biodiversity and all the concepts that we talk about an awful lot. So anyway, the theme kind of I'm using tonight is a gardener's challenge, because if you've been around Kansas very long, you understand the difficulty gardening here. And so my role with local gardeners is to troubleshoot, to problem solve, to connect them to resources that K-State has to help them be more successful. And a lot of times we do have resources that can help, sometimes we don't. So we try to connect them to any other resources we have. So in our environment here, I wanted to start off with the kind of the big overarching reality that I think, as I said, a lot of us here already understand. But there's a lot of research really pointing to the fact of how ecosystem services are not just tangible, but they're very intangible. And so this study was one of those that kind of linked together a lot of different research to identify over 227 pathways through which interaction with nature positively affects human well-being, and just the value that it is to us to be outside, to be in nature, to have nature experiences. And that's what we are trying to promote more and more for especially youth, adults, and really people of any age here in the district that we serve. So, it doesn't surprise, I think, probably doesn't surprise any of us to realize that these cultural ecosystem services are just as valuable. Things like social belonging, mental health, trying to think of the various aspects, even spirituality, things like that come out of our experiences in nature. And so taking those and helping people value those, along with all the typical things we talk about with our ecosystem services. So nature contributes a whole lot, whether you're a child, whether you're an adult. We kind of break it down when we're talking with our the people that we're serving in whatever setting into these categories: the restorative aspects of nature, connection, the way nature basically our attention changes when we're outside in nature. The type the way we use our mind is different. We use a state of attention called fascination, in which we're totally open to learning. There are so many benefits that cause us to grow when we go outside and lead to that healing process. And so for what I do, this is what I take as a privilege in my role, is to be able to connect people to this as much as I can. In little, sometimes it's just little small ways, sometimes it's bigger, but we try to really infuse this into even the little conversations that I have with folks regarding why is the tree dying? What's the problem here, right? So we get called out for various reasons to consult on things, and I try to infuse, try to turn the conversation as much as I can to these topics. So our mission, obviously, at least the mission I have in my role, is to create a nature-rich future and to build that into the content, into the activities that we do. You can see one of our master gardeners partnering with the local library to get kids outside to have a nature experience, right? To release lacewings, to study beneficial insects, to do things that help them connect these dots. And what we find is that nature does the teaching often. We just kind of gather them up in those settings, and they are open and they learn. So, but if you know about Kansas, obviously the land use has changed dramatically in our state. And this is, I think, a 2015 maybe map that kind of shows historically, the kind of cover we would have in our state. We're a prairie. Obviously, our prairie, our short grass prairies are mid, kind of here in the middle of the state would be more mixed grass, and then our tall grass and even some woodland type cover would be typical of what you would find naturally here in the prairie. But that previous photo kind of shows the changes that we're seeing, and the drastic, all that kind of brown area there kind of highlights just the change in use of that land, the cropland that's been developed, and the loss of those native stands of prairie. So I think we're maybe at 4%, I think, of what historically we have had as far as our native prairie here in the state. So that biodiversity, that plant life, obviously things have changed. And so historically, this is kind of what our state looked like. And so when we are working with gardeners and homeowners and teaching our courses and classes, I like to take lots of pictures, because that's something that really gets folks intrigued. If I can show them pictures of these beautiful prairie plants and connect them to those plants and the history that they have here in Kansas. And so we want to kind of draw them back this direction and say, this is we're talking about climate and our difficulties here that we're experiencing. One of the things we understand is that these plants have a history in difficult climate. And if you know anything about Kansas, I'm going to show you some slides here that why things are so difficult. But our native plants are built for this. Now we also have to acknowledge that underneath these plants there's an ecosystem that is making them climate resilient, and we know that we probably not even tapped into a fraction of the knowledge of what's actually happening with the microbial life, the ecosystems in the soil. But we know these plants, these prairie plants, are actually recruiting and enlisting microbial communities around their root systems, and that those microbes, whether it be various fungi, various bacteria, actually are increasing their drought tolerance if they recruit the right communities and those plants with their different layers of roots in the soil are all recruiting different sets of community around their root systems. And so there's this really, it's a really unique aspect to our prairie in the sense that we have not only the plants that are resilient, but the plants are much more resilient if the soil is healthy. And so we want to help gardeners connect that as well right in their backyard and start to make decisions that influence soil that is climate resilient as well. So obviously this is the underneath our feet part of that we don't see. So lots of things going on there. Environment, this is our number one challenge in Kansas as far as our the abiotic factors for non-living causes. So we don't have a lot of room for error. We've been through some significant weather events. You've been around here the last few years. So I'll highlight a few of those. One, this big wind event was pretty dramatic, just not too long ago, where we sustained these massive wind outfit. And actually, I was on campus here at K-State Salina and watched a building blow apart in that storm, and went to the ER because I got hit by a piece of tin. So, I mean, we're seeing things just, it's crazy. So we have very little room for error in general just because of our natural climate. And so we see things like this I work with homeowners on, where we're talking about plants that they've chosen that are hardy, that are resilient. They're trying to make an educated choice, but what happens is they planted the plant incorrectly. And so if the tree is planted too deeply, really we just basically eliminated the resiliency of that plant just by poor planting, making uneducated, I guess, decisions when we plant the tree itself. So this tree is planted too deep. It's been hit by a mower string trimmer once or twice, and of course that just sends it on its death spiral, basically. So there's not a lot we can do even when we choose the right plant and make important mistakes. This was a tree that in my own yard, that when we moved, I uncovered and found girdling roots, and so that's a common issue. We have to educate local homeowners. Even if this was a native tree, if it has girdling roots and it's grown incorrectly and we plant it 10 years down the road, the tree's going to start failing. And so trying to correct those decisions, help people understand how to deal with a holistic picture in their landscapes. Another picture of a tree, girdling root, that I actually had the courage to remove. Sometimes you can do that. Other times you can't. So this is an example of a tree that this has gone too far, of course, and so there's really no hope left. You can see how the top is dying out there on that maple. So we see things that obviously we try to avoid. This was an instance where a homeowner actually damaged the plant on the way home on the tailgate of the truck. And so we're trying to help people avoid the things that lead to these kind of issues. This is another instance where a fruit tree. So anybody that's trying to grow fruit trees, any fruit growers here, anyone been successful?
It's too hard.
It's tough. This is a peach tree. So we try. This is the case where we have to go above and beyond to protect these trees when they're young. The stress just creates, it could be hail, it could be a lot of things that create stress on these plants and create balloons that lead to damage. But this was a unique, I tried to take pictures of unique things I noticed in landscapes. This was one of basically a river of sap flowing down a big willow tree. And of course, normally willow trees are found in very swampy, moist soil, but a lot of times we're seeing them planted in backyards with compacted soil, very little soil health. And so what happens is the stress hits these plants, and of course they're getting infected with lots of different types of wetwood or different diseases that cause this sap to leak out. So there's just a lot of educating we have to do. Here in Kansas, we have what we call the continental climate. And so just, the basics on that would be just that we're here in the center of the country, which means we're at the kind of the mercy of all the forces, right? Everything hot, everything cold. I mean, everything just collides right here in our transition zone is what we call it. So we typically we experience the coldest temperatures. We experience temperatures consistent with far northeast part of the U.S. We also experience temperatures that are extreme as the far southwest. And so if you think about plants can often adapt to very cold climates, very hot climates, but trying to do both can be very difficult. And that's why our prairie plants are so unique in what they do. They can tackle this kind of challenge. If you've been here the last week, we've swung how many degrees?
Oh.
40. 80 plus degree swing in less than 4 days of time. I mean, how does this happen? I don't know. So, you can see that gives you the plant material that we're trying to grow and be successful with in home landscapes. So we do have a lot of cold, obviously. This is a unique picture I just took this spring of thunder snow. So has anybody ever been a part of thunder snow? We had some of that this January. This was a tree in town that got hit by lightning during that event, during a snowstorm of all things. And, just unique, that cold snap that we've just been through. But obviously you can see the temperatures here that we've just been through set some records for cold temperatures. And so we've been seeing that consistently over the last several years. Records being broken kind of on both ends of the cold and the heat. So this was just here last week. Back in 2021, you can see we had a huge invasion of cold air that shattered a lot of records. And we're still dealing with effects from this event. Records were set February 16th of 21. Salina, we were negative 20.7 degrees. That is well below the rating of our hardiness zone map. Let me tell you that. So we're hitting those cold temperatures. The effects of that were evident on even hardy plants like oak trees. So we're seeing here sawtooth oak, where literally every branch died back about 2 feet as a result. And these are considered the native plants, the plants we recommend. We're still seeing damage from these events. And it's pretty frustrating for homeowners, when that happens. When they try to do things the right way and we still get hit by problems like that. So we go back to December 23. We had one of the warmest Decembers 7th warmest December ever recorded. And of course that is very impactful for our plantings as well. Typically we'll have cold air that kind of sets up right after these nice big warm-ups. And you can see the pattern here where we went from a very mild December and had a January crash. And so these kind of things are really impactful in our landscapes with our homeowners. And you can see Kansas is in this back and forth, right in the center of these back and forth patterns. That's kind of the prairie, that's kind of continental climate at work, so to speak. But the extremes are certainly more extreme, and so it's affecting plants' ability to acclimatize. And so that's the hardening out process our plants are going through, triggered by a lot of environmental cues in the fall. We're seeing, that's being impacted. And so we have freezing, especially a lot of winter injury. That's been our number one plant complaint, really, or issue the last 3 to 4 years, has been this back and forth extreme fall, winter, spring weather where winter freezing injuries have been really problematic for a lot of plants. And so I have a whole lot of pictures here I'm going to go through really fast just to show you some evidence of that. But this is kind of what homeowners wake up to in spring. Big cracks on trees, big splits, big breaks on important trees in their landscape. Trees are a huge investment for a lot of homeowners. And so they see this and they think, I've lost 10 years of time, right? This tree I just put in, This is Colorado blue spruce, winter damaged, very cold tolerant plant. But here in Kansas, it's not a native plant. So, but this, even our cold hardy blue spruce, we're seeing winter injuries on here. Lots of other, what we call, sun scald during the winter on these trees. Big trees, small trees. This is a red bud planting. We're seeing that issue on. So a native tree, again, that's had some issues. You can see, we zoom in close, you can see how all of that cambium has been killed. And that tree is dying, so it's not going to survive. So we see things like this, and it's heartbreaking for homeowners. They try to do their best, and the weather comes and the extremes hit, and we see all these kind of damaged plants. So lots and lots of those there. I could go on and on. So even with our shrubs, some of our well-known hardy shrubs, we see those issues as well. Even with our evergreens, we're seeing a lot of this damage also. An eastern red cedar, you think, well, that's the toughest plant. We can't hardly get rid of those out in our fields and pastures, and yet here in our landscapes, they get winter killed. So this is a Spartan juniper has been a well-known landscape variety for many years that we've just been seeing lots and lots of winter climate damage on those as well. So plants that we traditionally think, these are tough, these are reliable, and we're seeing struggles. So it's not cold, and not just cold, it's hot. We have the heat roller coaster in the summer as well. So you can see the scorching on our leaves. This has been a common issue for many summers where we get into the peaks of our heat. A lot of trees, like maples especially, can be susceptible to scorch. May 2022, we had a very early heat wave that year. So we've been seeing peaks in heat that have come very quickly onset at times. And that can be a big issue early in the spring because when those new plants are coming out, their leaves are not hardened off yet. And so if they get damaged by the heat that soon, obviously they can be set back for the entire growing season. So early peaks in heat can be that was in May that year where that heat wave really hit us hard. And this is the end of the season where we're still seeing all that scorch that same year. Anyone who's here in 2023 probably wishes to forget that event. If you remember, we're having heat indexes in certain parts of the state that hit 130, I think. I mean, it was incredible. The high pressure that set up and brought all the heat on us during that period of August, but 113, 106, 108, 107. So we're setting records, in other words, with our heat. And that year we had tomatoes looking like this. They're plants are responding, trying to do everything they can to cope, but it's very difficult. So, they're trying to reduce their photosynthetic area, but we're getting scalded fruit. So, and there's nothing you can do in that kind of heat. I mean, it just really, it ruins an entire crop when that happens because there's not enough cover. We did learn something that year, though. We learned that this Florida 91 variety of tomato has more leaf cover and more shade. So that's a variety that makes sense, right, in a heat wave versus Heat Master, which doesn't quite have the same kind of cover. So we do these trials to try and identify, are there things that we can do to help gardeners cope, try to make sense of some of these changes. So a lot of heat-related issues. Spider mites, of course, are heat-loving insects. So when these hotter seasons get hotter, of course, we have more outbreaks of spider mites. We've seen that a lot in gardens as well. It gets pretty difficult to control once they are there. So this was a case even of a plant. You would think this is a spring picture, but this is actually not. This is an October picture of a pear tree that was tricked into blooming in October. I've never seen that. But this was, I think 22 or 23. It might have been 23 after that brutal heat wave that was so stressful. It actually tricked our local plants into blooming in the fall. It was the weirdest thing. So, the stress does to our plants. Drought is an issue as well. We're in the rain shadow, but you can see how quickly drought can set up from November 21 to 22. Of course, drought can grow. Within a year, we can be from almost nothing to extreme drought that quickly. 23, we're in drought. Here's our line of rain in 23, only 2 months out of the year where we receive average or above average rainfall. 24, still in drought. Here we go, 8 inches below as of last November. And here's just a longer look at the cycles of drought. So we're seeing, drought's a very regular cycle here in the continental part of the U.S. where we're dealing with this ongoing cycles. We can break those down. There's some severe drought and exceptional. So, we are seeing some regular recurrences. Now, this weed in particular is one that takes advantage of this. So, if you're a homeowner here, I've been getting lots of calls and complaints about little barley because this weed happens to be able to grow it opposite of all that heat. And when the lawns suffer and die out because of all the problems, well, we have this little opportunistic plant that comes and invades, right? It germinates in the fall at a different time. So the types of plants that are thriving are changing a little bit in that sense. And so we see little barley taking off. And folks with pets just test this plant because it's little barbs stick in the feet of their dogs. And it's frustrating. So we have to, work with some of these changes that we're seeing. Rain gauge now for sale, I guess. Now, if you were here last summer, we got blown away by some big wind, so that's been an ongoing issue. We had some very high-powered wind last summer. Here was on Europe's campus last summer, working with I know there was a lot of damage dealt with there. That big event back just a few years ago as well, and I mentioned it earlier. So, where now? Here's the end. So let's wrap up. Really, these are the things that these are the categories. So let's just say they're all kind of their own topic, but these are the things that I like to work with gardeners and homeowners and master gardeners and clients that I'm in touch with. These are the topics I like to try to get their interests pointed towards. So, soil health, less disturbance, cover crops, mulch, compost, plant diversity, native plants, adaptable plants, and smart water. So these are the things that we feel, at least I feel, are important in going forward. If we want to go forward, we almost are going to have to, in other words, kind of go backwards and embrace what we know works in this climate. And so, a lot of times my message is create nature where you are. For a homeowner here in Salina, Kansas, I want them to start to experience nature in their backyard when they step out of their door. So they start to value all these things that we're talking about tonight. Plant an oak tree, invite nature to be near you so you start to experience these benefits. Stop planting the red maples that aren't native here and turn yellow, right? Start enjoying the bur oak that's going to bring the nature to you. We want to get away from the all-American landscape, and this is kind of typical, but we're trying to embrace the sense of place that we have here, right? We're trying to move that direction. We need to embrace who we are here in the plains and value that. And really, going back to plants as equaling biodiversity, we promote that a lot with our plant list. We try to create resources that help people reap this reward in their yard. So this simple list that we've been working on, trying to help people plant, at least identify 12 plants here that will grow an awful lot of lepidopteran species. So things that will bring life to you where you can observe it and participate in biodiversity. So it's amazing how bur oak tree can do that. Over 500 species supported by that plant, one plant. So we know if we have above ground biodiversity, we also will start to build below ground biodiversity. And so those two things, like we said, the soil ecosystems we need to be climate resilient, we've got to have the plant diversity to recruit and build those microbial communities that make our soils climate resilient as well, to reap all those wonderful ecosystem services. So that's where we're going to end. Our mission is a nature-rich future, at least in my work, and that's kind of the way I approach it. So, Matt,
Thank you.
great to see you.
Now starts the third part of our evening. I would like to invite our speakers to be comfortable in the chairs. And then also Paul Les Jackson.
It's hard to get up at that.
Please don't. I want anybody to know who I am. Well, first of all, I'm going to have you folks all clap for these two. A little louder than that. Now, I don't know what to do with this conversation. I put together something to do that was nothing short of mildly brilliant. Now I heard this conversation, and I'm going to ask you folks some questions. You believe all this? You believe we got no problems? All we got to do is go to work. Anybody believe that? Anybody believe that? Hold up your hand. It's all right. Go ahead and hold up your hand.
Do you believe?
And I think the reason you're not holding your hand up is you remember about 55 years ago, right here on this campus, was Earth Day. And we marched. By the way, that was, I came here, by the way, 70 years ago as a student.
No.
And we've had Earth Day at 55 years. And in that period of time, we have increased from about 225 or 50 parts per million to 400 and some, 425 parts per million. What's going on? Why can't we stop it? I've had 3 children that would say to me at lunch, and so, Dr. Doom, what can we as ordinary citizens do about this? And they kind of grew up that way. But we have here, since April 22nd, 1970, the 55 years of time, and we went from 325 parts per million to 425. So, why is it we can't do anything about that? We had some wonderful stuff here. Now I want to jump to one other thing, and I'm going to ask a question. In this room tonight, there are some people that are rather new at Kansas Wesleyan. And they are with me out at the Land Institute. So I'll tell you what was put in the pasture for these Kansas Wesleyan people. This morning, yesterday, or this month, this week, put in 4 head of cattle. And what did I see before I came here today? Well, I saw a big long tube upstairs, and in there are going to be some baby chicks tomorrow. We're going to have these folks growing food. And these are Kansas Wesleyan people that are bringing some others in here, students, 6 or 7 of them. And they'll be here from mid-March until later on, October, mid-October. Now, I grew up on in a farm in the Kansas River Valley. When I came here, we didn't have any of that because we had all been, most of us had been farmers. And that's what we use the summers with. You know, you go to college and now what we're doing, because much of that is gone, what we're now doing is getting these students to be farmers, to learn to do farmers and have gardens right here. And they're building a kind of a prototype because they understand a simple reality. No matter what happens, we're going to need food, we're going to need clothing, and we're going to need shelter. So they are developing the cultural capacity. Now, will that do any good? What else can you do? Because the rest of us don't seem to be able to do much about anything. So now, my friends, we're glad to have you here. And you gave 2 very fine talks. What do you think our chances are? And who wants to speak first? What do you think our chances are to pull out of this nosedive that we're in? Things will get better later anyway, but go ahead.
Well, I think we're on, well, we got a good challenge, right? We got a good challenge before us, and it's what's called a wicked problem. A wicked problem means there's no clear answer, right? There's no clear black and white answer, or there's no accountability either. So we really need to come at it with everything we got. And what you're doing is excellent. It's excellent. We need local people learning how to produce. What you're doing is fantastic. It's reframing our relationships with nature. That's what we need to work on. We need to recognize the connections across nature and across ecosystems and across society to do something. We can think about carbon capture. We can think about renewable energies. But we really have to redefine our relationship with nature, right?
Okay. Keep going. Yeah.
Jason?
No, yeah, it's funny, just being an extension, I kind of see both sides of this, where, there's I'm fortunate to be on the horticulture side of research and extension, where I have a little more freedom in expressing, just like what we mentioned before, reframing nature for people. And I feel like that really has become a guiding force for me, because I've seen what it does. When we take, just like what Wes says, when we do a Master Gardener training series in the fall, 12 to 15 weeks. We include a lot of these topics, and fortunately I'm able to design some of that myself. And so a lot of times I see the change in a few people in just 12 weeks. And this is like 4 hours on a Thursday, once a week for 12 weeks. And by the end of that course, I have probably at least 90% of those folks passionate about this. And it just boggles my mind, how are they not passionate before this moment? So how are we not reaching them earlier in that sense. Because a lot of the things, even just a basic thing like valuing a beautiful caterpillar in your yard and understanding the connection to this insect and what it's doing in the ecosystem and its perfect place there to harvest the sun's energy and pass it in the food system. I mean, things like that they just have not ever, they've never put that piece together and never heard it.
So in 1856, before that time, there was no oil in the United States of America. That's 165 or 6 years ago. I'm the third generation from that. Four of my grandparents were there at the time of Drake's oil well in 1859. One was in vitro, but 1859. Now, two of those held me in their lap. Grandparents, not great-grandparents, grandparents. That's just three. So, what did we do? We got into the advancement of civilization. And now we've got to come to a redefinition of it. A redefinition of civilization. And I want to ask our wonderful colleagues here, what are you going to do? What are you going to tell them when you already know that we cannot continue on the path that we're on? So I'm going to give you a little hope later on. But not yet. Not yet. Not until we come to realize where we are, and how we got where we are, and why we cannot say no to portable liquid fuels.
Yeah.
Why we cannot say no to it. So we're taking you serious as far as the content. We see good stuff. In fact, Jason comes out of a period of 1862, where the land-grant college system was established.
Mm-hmm.
Think of that, early on, just 3 years after Drake's oil well, the land-grant college system was established to have agriculture be represented so that we were careful not to have soil erosion. We were careful to not be doing bad things to the earth, even as we were plowing up the prairie and so on. So we've had a big lift, and we look at the science that we have had in going to the moon and what the astrophysicists have done for us. They have given us a new world. It's not the world of the biblical anymore. It is a world that is much larger than anything we imagine. And we've had a lot of good science come. So what's our problem? What is holding us back? That's just a question, holding us back. And again, I am going to tell you a little something later, but not yet. I want to hear from folks.
We're the problem.
What?
We are the problem.
We are the problem. Okay, so we're the problem.
Don't want to get our nails dirty.
Don't want to get our nails dirty.
We don't want to approach approach the city boards.
Don't want what?
Approach the city boards, tree advisory boards. You don't want to join forces
Yeah.
with them, you know, on a, I don't know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
I thought I heard you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But every one of us almost in this room drove here tonight to hear this talk.
Yeah. Why not?
Well, it's a long way to walk.
Yeah.
Wes, we're wondering what to do after the last 5 weeks.
What do we do after the
After
last
the last 5 weeks when we can't, our governmental entities, our schools, grants for studying climate change are canceled, scrubbed. How do we go forward dealing with what we know and what is happening?
Go ahead, Wes.
Okay.
I think dissemination of information to everyone in an understandable form, so that folks that are resistant to this information can accept it and not reject it. It's a cultural shift.
I like that, you know, it's like trying to understand the agronomics, you know, behind.
But most people cannot, because they haven't been given the prior education. So it's education of the masses.
We haven't suffered enough yet to really.
I don't want to do anymore.
Suffering's coming.
So, I want to ask President Thompson a question. Here is a man that has over 1,000 students here who has taken a kind of a risk in a way to start students learning about agriculture. And we have some now.
Mhm.
That was unthinkable
Right.
when I was here and actually teaching here and so on. But there is something that has happened that has caused this very modest beginning. Now, how many folks do you think will be willing to get behind that kind of an effort with the students, especially in our era, who want to develop the cultural capacity for at least being able to get along with food, clothing, shelter? Do you think that we can get the kind of force to make that expand here? We got cows now, we got some chickens now, and we got a very small beginning. So how is it that President Thompson was able to come to this? I found out from him. But Mr. Thompson, Dr. Thompson, I think you ought to help us out here, understanding where are the rest of your colleagues in small liberal arts colleges?
Wes, I can't answer that part of the question, but what I can answer is maybe the first part, which is, I think we have a moral responsibility to be
A moral
engaged
responsibility.
in these conversations, because I can see where the world is going. If I'm not preparing my students for it. then
You
I'm
hear
not
that?
setting-
You hear this? Did y'all hear what he said?
Yeah, we have
Okay.
more responsibility.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that coupled with the fact that you're our most famous alumnus. And you've been in my ear for 5 years. And I've been listening.
Like somebody else here. Somebody else. So, now, let me ask you, do these kinds of questions change the nature of your research? From your research?
Well, I welcome these questions, and this is what we're all questioning, right? As the fate of our planet,
Yeah.
right? And we're in a transition period.
We are. Okay, so we're in a transition period. We need to hear from you what that is.
Well, we're in a transition period where we're into the Anthropocene, so the humans are driving climate now on planet Earth, right? And so we get to define, now we've done it the wrong way, well, let's redefine that and try and do it the right way. But I don't know exactly what that is. It's gonna take some bright minds, it's gonna take a lot of realigning our relationships and good conversations.
Okay, here's another part of that conversation. Drake's oil well was 1859. What happened 10 years, or 50 years later in 1909? Fritz Harbor and Karl Bosch. That Bosch transformation. Now, that fertilizer, more of it is now on the earth that nature produces.
Yeah.
Now, and the energy cost on that is huge. So the very thing we need for fertility for 8 billion people worldwide.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem.
So what was the world population at the time of 1800? What?
It's 1 billion?
1 billion, about 1 billion. Now we're at 8.
Mm-hmm.
And gaining. Now I say, well, the rate is going down, but we're still gaining. We probably won't top out for another 2 or 3, whatever. So,
2 or 3.
what I'm trying to get us to understand or think of a different way of dealing with the problem. I want to read one of Wendell Berry's poems. He says, "It's hard to hope. It is harder as you grow old, for hope must depend on feeling good. And there is the dream of loneliness at absolute midnight. You also have withdrawn belief in the present reality of the fact which surely will surprise us. And hope is harder when it cannot come by prediction. Cannot come by prediction. Any more than wishing. But stop dithering. The young ask the old to hope. What will you tell them? Tell them at least what you say to yourself." That's the way he ended that poem.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we say, if there is a path forward, it requires us to face our worst fears of the future and then speak of them fearlessly. So there is something to do. I think one of the problems we have is, come on, let's not have another downer. Let's be positive.
Yeah.
That has become the way of this culture. Rather than saying, what are we going to do? And then get after it. And there's satisfaction in that. I've been trying to find the origin of the word hope. How long have we had the word? And positive, and so on. And what do most of us do? We get up and we work, we go through the day, and we keep going. So, if though we have the beginning of the new ideas, rather than a dependency upon the growth growth economy, we got a chance. But we've got to be willing to say that the growth economy is the problem. And we have a hard time saying that. So, what does that mean for those of us that are doing research? When it is the research that is giving us the insights, well, that's just the way things are. So anybody else, what else is on your mind? But I want us to go out of here happy.
Well, you don't want us to talk then.
Yeah.
The limits of population have always been war, famine, and disease, as far as we can basically do. And our scientists have done such a good job over the last, since the Enlightenment, that we have eliminated many of those cases. We have destroyed our own population limits through our science, through our embrace of the world and our perception of our role in it.
Yeah. Okay.
But that doesn't make it feel good, but.
But how is that any different than what we were saying to one another 55 years ago when we marched down Santa Fe? We were there. I mean, this campus was loaded with students. So what we can say, I think, is that the environmental movement, part one, has failed. And now we got to reconstruct our thinking and then begin to dig in. Yeah.
So Wes, I'm not going to give you exclusive rights to the term, but I think it was you that I first heard talk about the extractive economy. And there are many people, younger people in this community and around the country that call themselves the Democratic Socialists. And the Democratic Socialists of America are talking about the failure of the neoliberal economy, an economy which is based at heart on colonialization, incarceration, particularly in the slave states. Of course, you talked about that at KU, about petroleum being the new slave economy. But getting work done cheaply for the purpose of extracting for the comfort of those at the top of the hierarchy, like the pyramids. So I don't have an answer to that, but how we get to a younger generation who are being educated at Kansas Wesleyan and other universities about this reality when they're concerned about the job is a challenge, not a solution. But I think that awareness is something we might carry with us also.
So we bring two people to us that are gifted, talented, they give us the kind of information. Do we not need more engagement than historically you have had some?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, as an anthropologist, if you put that hat on, are there insights you've gleaned from the Incan native peoples about how under stress they are, how they have negotiated any rationing of resources that helps them envision transitioning through all this?
Yeah,
Because it seems like this is exactly what we're going to have to be thinking seriously about, is the rationing process of resources that are increasingly finite. And we have to look to other places that will help us.
It's really difficult because they're obviously aren't contributing to climate change, but they're the first to actually feel the impacts of climate change. And they have a framework of relating to their environment called Aini, which means reciprocity. And I think that's a really good lesson that we should be thinking about in terms of our relationships with nature. We're giving and we're taking, and we have to make sure that we're in Aini, that we're in balance, because we're out of balance right now. So that's a framework that
asking about doing something. Is this an IE?
Did y'all hear that?
Yeah.
There's some- Yeah.
I've been dealing with waste reduction for the last 4 years. I know more about trash than I ever thought I would. But I've begun to realize that when you think about how we think about waste, for instance, not generating it, it's very much in parallel with how we think about our ecosystem, our environment. And it's so different, and it's a great measure. For example, in Salina, last year, we just got the information, we put 150 million pounds of trash into our landfill. Just Salina. And if you add the other counties, it gets up closer to 200 million pounds. But we talk about it in tons because it's easier to deal with. But it also kind of reduces the significance of it. So, I don't know, if we get to a point where we look at something, we grow it instead of buying it, or if we can put it in containers that we already have and then reuse those, we're beginning to think about how we are treating our planet too. So.
Yeah, we need about 3 or 4 Earths to keep up with the amount of consumption and the population growth. Right, so we're going to have to reframe our consumption patterns and our waste patterns. And in nature, nature's teaching us all the time. Nature teaches us that there's no waste, that everything gets reused, right, by another organism. We're the only ones creating waste here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If we didn't do that, then we'd be doing what nature wants us to do, right? Don't generate it, reuse it.
And that old phrase, reduce, reuse, recycle, still holds true.
Repurpose.
And repurpose. Thank you.
Compost.
And what?
Compost. Compost.
Okay, see, thank
All
you.
of it. So.
Yeah.
That was with us 55 years
There you
ago.
go. It's like we forgot. What happened?
Well, actually, it accelerated. So is there something associated with our solutions that leads to acceleration rather than stopping? It's not just a question. I mean, what is it? You have a comment.
Back to Heine again.
Yeah, that's my favorite
Where does that
thing.
come from in those cultural traditions? In other words, there's another level of a human being that's sensitive to that balanced relationship that seems not to be present in so many people in Western capitalist culture and so on. So speak about the cultural, spiritual, emotional, what are the roots of that in a small scale kind of tradition? When things shift as they're doing now there, they have to adjust, but they keep that sense of Heine coming from somewhere. They're closer to something in sensing that distortion, that imbalance. We know it in our head somewhere, but we don't feel it in a way that's culturally relevant to us now.
That's right, and I think there's a lot that we get disconnected from nature constantly by the way things are propaganda, and they live with it. They see the glacier, so there's just that closeness. Why do we need a big? Do we need a live stream video showing us the melting glaciers all the time so that we don't forget it? We disconnect from it. And we need to reconnect. And we've made great progress with the Paris Accord, right? Maybe some of you have heard of the Paris Accord, that, the countries signed on to reduce fossil fuel emissions, and they made pacts, and the UK just shut down their last coal-producing plant last year. Wonderful. well, we've withdrawn from the Paris Accord.
We haven't, he has.
The U.S. has, because of the political situation. All right, that just puts the heat on us a little bit more, right? And when 4 years comes up, we'll have some catching up to do, even more so.
Question up here.
Other comment back there?
I was really struck by when you were talking about the water towers being considered deities, and as they're melting, it's like that loss of the sacred. And when you were talking about having moral obligation to your students, it kind of, to me, just the sacred or morality that doesn't necessarily have to be tied to any one specific religion, but that carries more weight, like having some sort of sacred connection to the land and nature versus just we should. Like having that connection is a much deeper connection than just like, well, I should do this. And that's something that I feel like would be helpful for, and that I think is like the work that you're doing with the gardening is really important, just helping people find that relationship that's more than just an intellectual idea, but that's a true connection.
Yeah, it's fascinating in our work. A lot of times, the folks that we work with, I mean, it is just it's a stepping stone kind of approach, because it's amazing to me how things click so quickly once they catch on. But like you said, we have an innate need for nature relatedness in just as human beings, and so just helping people realize that is quite something. Yeah, just they are actually they're you know, I mean, frankly, it's just they are not receiving, they're not well off as a person without the benefit of nature and those either cultural ecosystem services or ecosystem services, all the things that we benefit from by just our participation. And so I agree, yeah, wholeheartedly, yeah.
Well, I kind of go back to the indigenous look at the world, and frequently, I'm not a sociologist, but indigenous people seem to have this reciprocity thinking almost everywhere. Native Americans in here, the indigenous people. But you wonder why we don't have it. And partially our conquering attitudes, but if it's going to become a moral obligation, you got to feel the reciprocity. To feel that reciprocity, you got to have an exposure. You can't catch measles without the exposure. So the same thing goes for reciprocity and taking care of the earth. And I think gardens are a great way to go with it. And I'll give you some idea for more rich nature. How about a garden in every school? Why can't there be a garden in every school? The kids have no idea what the hell we
I was on the school board, and we tried it, and the problem is during the summer, the kids are gone, so who's gonna take care of the garden? I'm totally for it, I'm not there now, but that was
okay.
a
You
problem.
identify the problem, you find a solution, you look for one. You can do it.
Yeah, I didn't like it, but I had someone put it for it.
Parents, right down here, Kansas State University, Master Gardener Program.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to bring that up, because we are working with, we have community gardens in Salina, and that's actually one of the, there's a couple people in this room working with us on one of our, we have a food desert here in Salina, in North Salina. We also have a community garden in North Salina, and so we're working on a mission to renovate that garden, because there's a lot of energy towards the food desert and access to local food, and that is part of that mission, is actually to rethink how we address getting kids into the gardens. Like Phil said, the schools are so tapped out, they won't really entertain the idea, but all right, we're reframing the thinking and saying, well, we're going to create the garden and bring the kids out there through city collaborations with other folks, and we're going to try to find a way to do it, because when I see kids outdoors in nature, they are learning without even knowing they're learning. It's imprinting them with, nature does that, so it's fascinating.
I think one thing we need to remember is that we are so disconnected. Why do we have to feel like we have to make a connection and we need nature to respond or perform? I think we forget we are nature. And I really like when the conversation goes to the sense of place. If we want to see, we only need to go outside. The sun has already set. We only need to go outside and look. And I think what we lack is really cultural. I love when we are working and we all sit in front of screens all the time.
Yeah.
And today someone was like in the office, somebody was like, I need to get a break and go touch grass. And why aren't we all doing that? It doesn't have to be a perfect garden. It doesn't have to be a no lawn. Nature is all around us, and in this room there's nature too. It's weird. We are feeling it. So I think sometimes we make things more complicated. We need the programs and we need the structure, but we are closer than we think. Yeah.
We have a summer team that we would like to introduce to everybody if we want you to stand up.
So last one's you to get to know the community resilience hub people. So can you come? Can you come?
Or at least have it stand up.
Just come here.
Yeah, I guess so.
This was not rehearsed.
You got more than that. Oh, no, here we go. Now, I want this chap here, he's our farmer. Now, he's gonna tell you what he has been working on and what those calves are out there in the field right now, or to come.
So just last week, we got 4 head of cattle, 2 cow-calf pairs. So the cows.
Say your name again.
Oh, of course. So my name's Alex Roa. I'm the Joe Hale chairman of Regenerative Agriculture for the new farmer training program here at Kansas Wesleyan. And so just last week, we got 2 cow-calf pairs. The cows are dairy cows, and their 2 calves we're going to train up as oxen. And so we use them on the farm. We'll have a tractor as well to show our students both sides. We want to show that you can use oxen on a small, medium-sized farm and accomplish just as much with a tractor. And so Andrew and I will be out there training the calves 5 days a week to be oxen.
Wow.
Okay, let me introduce. If you were out there and you got one of our flyers, you can open it and you see our 3 areas of focus. We have education, action, and advocacy. And our education efforts are 2. One is a center of environmental justice, so we can give people that come here to do any major the chance to learn about our planet, to set foot on a farm, to learn sustainability skills. And our other effort in education is a farmers training program in regenerative agriculture that we brought from from the Rodeo Institute. And Alex and Andrew Hall are both Rodeo Institute alumni, and they are here to make sure to carry on this program, which is a certificate program. You can get 12 credits. It goes together with the growing season from March 17th. We are doing a lot of last minute details because students are going to be here on the 14th. And it goes together with the growing season until the end of October. We have, I'm going to leave Sheila last. We have Reagan Rose. She's our campus farmer, and she oversees a garden that we have right next to the president's house. And we have plans, and we are writing grants and the hustling of getting more resources so we can get a second garden on the way to our dining hall and some indoor growing, so we can teach students both outside and inside ways of growing food so they can see it when they are around campus. And Reagan is also going to be teaching some classes in the farmers training program. And then we have Sheila and I. Sheila is the coordinator for the Community Resilience Hub, and I'm the director. Sheila does a lot with the action, which is what is in the center of your map, which is an effort to localize our food system and to try to decrease food insecurity by motivating farmers to grow for their own community, to make Kansas maybe less dependent on other states for our food. We know that over 90% of what we eat comes from other states, and we want to change that. So Sheila is our action person. She's also the coordinator, and me and her, we do whatever needs to be done. And then we have the third arm, which is advocacy. We started with civil discourse training because we have forgotten how to talk to each other. We have some people here that have been in our civil discourse training. We do it yearly. This year it's going to happen at the Salina Public Library. I don't remember when. In October. On Saturday. And we are also part of a local food policy council to try to start talking about where our food comes from in our local politics. So we're trying to come up with a holistic way of rethinking where our food comes from, how do we grow it, and how can really we be more respectful of the place that we're standing on, and reframe the way that we relate. I hope that's what you're.
Yes, this is happening at a liberal arts college, that we want to keep the liberal arts and agriculture and all of that as one. And so, send money. No, just remember what we're doing. This is, you're seeing the first of it.
Yes.
And so I'm very grateful for running into a man from the liberal arts college that has elected to make this an important part of what Kansas Wesleyan is about. And so, anyway.
I wanted to ask if you have any other questions for our speakers or for Wes. We are about 10 minutes from our limit, so we can stay here a little while longer. You can sit down. Don't let I also wanted to say that the idea for these speaker series is not to ask you for money, although if you want to, we'd love to have it. But we want to be in a very liberal arts fashion. We want to keep bringing people from different fields to speak to us. And then we want to have Rex react to them. I know he asked some tough questions, so thank you. And then keep reflecting and keep trying to find solutions together. Yes.
I've got a pretty practical question, but I'm a big believer in regenerative agriculture, have been for several years. I'd like to ask the young man in the vest up there a question. My tenant farmer, I've got him believing in regenerative agriculture pretty much, but it's hard for me to push him to do cover crops between cash crops when we're in the middle of a drought. Could you tell me what your thoughts are about that? Is it a good idea to maybe not do cover crops during a drought? Or do you do them anyway and spray?
Sure. But it's nice out of your place.
So the question's about cover crops. Actually, cover crops are fantastic to have during a drought. So there are these 6 ideas that go with soil health. And so one of them is soil armor, or armoring the soil. So the more you can keep your soil covered, the more water is going to stay in the soil. And even though those crops are bringing up some of that moisture to grow, they're going to keep a lot more of that water in the soil. And so once you get to your cash crop, you don't need so much rain because that water's already in the soil. So that's kind of the biggest thing with cover crops.
Are there some cover crops that are better at doing that don't use as much of the moisture themselves that work? Maybe some that aren't so tall, or some that you would recommend over others?
Sure, and also you want to look at what nutrients are in your soil already. So you can do a soil test, and so for example, if you need more nitrogen, clover is perfect for that. So clover will cover the whole ground, keep the water in the soil, but then fix some nitrogen to put back into the soil. And so you can do things like that. Diversity, like Jason was talking about, is perfect. You don't want to plant just one cover crop most of the time. A diversity will keep more water in the soil. Off the top of my head, I couldn't just recommend one, but kind of taking those aspects into how you want to adapt to the cover crops, the soil tests, and then seeing what plants can put those nutrients into the soil would help out quite a bit.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Success. Good answer.
Thank you again. Thanks for the and stay tuned.
The next one and the last one of the year is going to be on April 30th, and we're going to bring 2 professors and 2 poets from Berkeley, but Raven raised her hand, so not good.
Oh, I'm not just going along with what you said, that we have an Instagram and a Facebook, so if you want to follow along what we're doing, I also have social media, so I will keep you all updated, and you can also see cute cow pictures and chicken pictures
So look for updates on the cattle and the chickens. Follow our Instagram, which is @Community Resilience.
I'll write it down.
Okay.
April 26th.
Yes, right before April 30th. Let me talk about April 25th and 26th first. There is a documentary about Wes Jackson's life and ideas. It's called The Prairie Prophecy. You can learn more about it at prairieprophecy.com. And we're going to have the premiere of this documentary here in Salina on Saturday, April 26th at the Steeple Theater. I believe it's at 6 p.m., but we have a weekend of activities. And on April 25th, you have the opportunity of going on a field day at the land where we're doing our farmers training program, which is Wes Jackson's land. So you can see the things that we're going to be doing there. That's April 25th on Friday. During the day, you can see the land. And on April 25th in the evening, there is going to be an event at the Farm and the Odd Fellows Brewery in Minneapolis. It's a short movie called Beer Saves the World. It talks about currents of beer and focuses on currents of more. Then on April 26th, which is a Saturday, we have the premiere of the movie. And I don't have the times yet, but at the Salina Arts Center, there will be a meet and greet with Wes an hour before the movie. I believe it's from 5 to 6, then the movie from 6 to 8, and then a question and answer with Wes and the producers of the movie. And then on the next week, which is April 30th, then will be our last speaker series of the academic year with 2 poets from Berkeley. The streaming people would like us to change the room, so I'm not gonna say where it is gonna be yet. But it's gonna be here at Kansas Wesleyan.